The battle is lost. 80,000 enemies close in from every side. Every route of retreat is cut off, so Shimazu Yoshihiro does the unthinkable. He charges straight into them. Who were the men who made this impossible escape possible? "1,500 samurai, 80,000 enemies closing from every side. What kind of general orders his men to charge forward, straight through the heart of the enemy, just to escape?" October 1600. Japan stood at the edge of civil war. Two great powers clashed for control of the nation. Tokugawa Ieyasu in the east, and the supporters of the Toyotomi clan in the west. Caught in the middle was a warlord from the far south, Shimazu Yoshihiro. At 65 years old, he was one of Japan's most battle-hardened commanders. His clan, the Shimazu, had ruled the southern tip of Kyushu for centuries, and they had never, not once, known defeat by flight. The Shimazu had almost done the impossible. By the 1580s, they had conquered nearly all of Kyushu, an island larger than many European nations. They swept north, swallowing clan after clan, until only the Otomo stood in their way. Then Toyotomi Hideyoshi intervened. In 1587, he marched south with a force no one could resist. The Shimazu surrendered, but on their own terms. They kept their domain, they kept their pride, and in the years that followed, they would prove that submission to Hideyoshi did not mean weakness. Shimazu Yoshihiro earned a reputation that crossed the sea. During Hideyoshi's invasion of Korea in the 1590s, his forces fought with a ferocity that unnerved even the Ming Chinese army. He became known as Oni Shimazu, the Devil Shimazu. It was not a nickname born of cruelty. It was born of the unnerving certainty that this man could not be stopped. He was 65 when Sekigahara came. He had been at war his entire life, and he was still not finished. In 1598, Hideyoshi died. The careful balance he had maintained began to unravel almost immediately. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the most powerful lord in Japan, moved quickly to consolidate power. Ishida Mitsunari, a loyal administrator of the Toyotomi clan, saw this as a betrayal of everything Hideyoshi had built. Alliances fractured. Japan split into two. The Eastern Army behind Ieyasu, and the Western Army behind Mitsunari. When Mitsunari called on Western lords to resist, Shimazu Yoshihiro answered. But the relationship between Yoshihiro and Mitsunari was never warm. The Shimazu had arrived at the Western Army camp with roughly 1,500 men, far fewer than Mitsunari had hoped for. There were arguments over strategy and respect. Yoshihiro had proposed an audacious night attack on Ieyasu's camp before the battle, a plan that might have changed everything. Mitsunari refused. It was a decision that would haunt the Western Army. By dawn on October 21st, both armies were ready to meet. The battlefield at Sekigahara was a valley, surrounded by mountains on three sides. shrouded in morning fog. Around 80,000 Eastern soldiers faced a comparable force to the west. Numbers roughly equal. But numbers meant nothing if loyalty could not be guaranteed. Shimazu Yoshihiro took his position in the center of the Western Army's lines. His 1,500 men formed a small island in a sea of soldiers. He waited. The fog began to lift. The sound of gunfire cracked through the valley. The Battle of Sekigahara had begun. For hours, the fighting raged across the valley floor. Yoshihiro watched and waited. His forces had still not been given the order to advance. Whatever the reason, Yoshihiro sat motionless as the battle unfolded around him. Then, at the critical moment, everything changed. Kobayakawa Hideyoshi, one of the Western Army's largest contingents, switched sides. Thousands of soldiers who had been waiting on the hill poured down into the Western Army's flank. In minutes, the battle transformed. The Western Army, which had been holding its own, collapsed. Lord after lord fled the field. Units dissolved. Mitsunari himself abandoned his position. The Eastern Army surged forward to finish the rout. Shimazu Yoshihiro found himself stranded. His forces surrounded on multiple sides. The Western Army gone. The northern road, the safest path of retreat, was cut off. He looked around the valley. Everywhere, his enemies. There was no way forward, and there was no way back. Yoshihiro called his commanders together. The options were simple and terrible. Surrender and face the mercy of a Tokugawa court that had just crushed its enemies. Attempt to retreat north and be destroyed in the open field. Or do something that no general in Japan would ever consider. Charge forward. Not sideways, not backward, but directly through the Eastern Army's formation. Through Tokugawa Ieyasu's own position. It was not a plan born of strategy. It was a gamble born of character. For Shimazu Yoshihiro, a man who had spent a lifetime choosing audacity over caution, it was the only path left. The order was given. With a war cry that carried across the valley, the Shimazu formation surged forward. 1,500 men, compact, disciplined, moving as a single weapon, drove straight into the heart of Ieyasu's lines. The shock of the assault stunned the Eastern soldiers. No one had expected an attack. Every commander on the field was preparing to pursue a retreating army. Instead, they faced a spearhead aimed directly at the Tokugawa command itself. Ieyasu's retainers scrambled. For one extraordinary moment, the most powerful man in Japan was personally under threat. The Shimazu punched through. But breaking through was only the beginning. Thousands of Eastern soldiers were giving chase. And this is where the Shimazu revealed a tactic unlike anything else in samurai warfare: the Sutegamari. Small groups of warriors deliberately fell behind. They waited as the enemy drew near, then rose and attacked. Not to win, not to survive, only to slow the pursuit long enough for Yoshihiro to widen the gap. Each Sutegamari group bought precious minutes. Each man who fell was making a deliberate exchange. His life for his lord's chance of escape. The heaviest sacrifice fell on one man, Shimazu Toyohisa, Yoshihiro's nephew, just 30 years old. He led the final rearguard action against the Eastern Army's most feared commander, Ieyasu, known as the Red Devil, whose soldiers wore distinctive scarlet armor. Toyohisa held the line as long as he could. He was struck by arquebuses. He continued fighting. He was struck again. He refused to fall until he could no longer stay mounted. He died in the valley at Sekigahara. The path his uncle needed had been opened. Yoshihiro broke free. Of the 1,500 men who had entered Sekigahara, only a fraction survived. Some accounts say as few as 80 made it out. The exact number has been debated for 4 centuries. What is not debated is what happened next. Yoshihiro moved west, pushing through enemy-held territory toward the sea. He commandeered a boat. He crossed the water. Slowly, painfully, the man who had charged through 80,000 enemies began the long journey home to Satsuma, the southern province his family had ruled for 300 years. The pursuit did not stop. Ieyasu dispatched forces to capture the man who had dared charge through his position. Along the route, Shimazu retainers fought skirmishes and blocked roads across western Japan. Yoshihiro reached the sea. He crossed to Kyushu. He reached Satsuma, his domain, his people. But the war, in a sense, was not over. Ieyasu controlled Japan, and Shimazu Yoshihiro, one of the last Western Army commanders still standing, was in no position to dictate terms. The answer that came from Edo surprised many. Tokugawa Ieyasu, for all his ambition, was also a pragmatist. The Shimazu domain was vast, distant, and fiercely defended. A campaign to crush them would be costly and ultimately unnecessary. Negotiations began. In 1601, the Shimazu submitted formally to Tokugawa rule. Their domain was largely preserved. They were not executed like Ishida Mitsunari. They were not stripped of land like many Western lords. They had lost the battle, but the Shimazu clan would endure. The Shimazu Nochiguchi, the Shimazu fighting retreat, became one of the most celebrated episodes in Japanese military history. Not as a victory, but as a testament to something harder to define: the refusal to accept death on anyone else's terms. In Kagoshima today, the descendants of these warriors still commemorate the day. Memorials stand for the Sutegamari warriors who chose to die so others could live. Shimazu Toyohisa is remembered by name. 4 centuries later, the retreat from Sekigahara remains a symbol of what the Shimazu believed a samurai should be. The Satsuma domain would go on to shape Japanese history in ways no one at Sekigahara could have anticipated. 2.5 centuries later, when the samurai era was ending, it was Satsuma warriors who led the Meiji Restoration, and then in 1877, who fought the last armed uprising of the samurai class. The spirit that drove Yoshihiro to charge through 80,000 enemies did not die in that valley. It passed through generations into men like Saigo Takamori, who would also choose audacity over submission. The Shimazu way endured long after Sekigahara turned to memory. Next time on Samurai Chronicles, a dying warlord handed his 3 sons a bundle of arrows. 1 arrow breaks easily, 3 together cannot. From that single lesson, Mori Motonari built an empire that dominated Western Japan for a century. That story is next.
If Shimazu Yoshihiro's story moved you, subscribe to Samurai Chronicles. New episodes every day. History that doesn't stay buried.